All right, unfortunately, this is not a presentation about AI. So if you're expecting artificial intelligence, or even sometimes executive intelligence, this is not the talk. However, we are going to talk about the exciting world of tabletop exercises. I have been in, where my mouse at? You can see me walk around. I'm a walker and I talk. So who am I? My name is Jared Gray. And one of my origin story comes from the fact that my first degree was in folklore. So I learned how to tell a story. And I will try to keep those to a minimum today. But I realized real quickly that folklore doesn't pay the bills. And I've always enjoyed tech. So I went and got my master's in cybersecurity at Southern Utah University, continued on with my certifications with my CISSP, and was hired on at Lucid Software a little over 3 years ago. And one of the things that they tasked me to do was to pick up a lot of different projects. First, it was audits, SOC 2, ISO. Then, this last year, there was discussions about our tabletop. I'd sat in on 3 different tabletop events. I'm getting ahead of myself. So we'll go ahead here. So that's who I am in my cybersecurity field. Who am I in my role-playing games, my RPGs? Of course, many people my age can say they've been playing Dungeons & Dragons or DMing for 30 years, and I have as well. One of the things I also do, though, is volunteer to coordinate conferences, conventions like this one here, but for role-playing games, whether it's FanX or SAINTCON or SALTCON. For the better part of 3 years, I worked for Wizards of the Coast as a regional coordinator for the Rocky Mountain region, working in like Idaho conventions, Colorado, Montana, those kind of places, running and teaching DMs how to be able to run these games and engage everybody, not just those really into D&D. And so when I started into cybersecurity and I started going to these tabletop experiences, I'm like, oh, right on. I'm going to get to see how Ultraviolet does tabletop, or I get to see how this vendor does our tabletop. And I'd sit there and I'd watch our executive team pull out their incident response playbook. And about 10 minutes in, half the team would have the book down and they'd kind of zone out. Someone would be checking Slack. 4 hours later, they've almost got the idea on what's going on. 6 hours later, they've got it. And now we get a great after action report from our vendor that explains how awesome we did. Because sure, our head of engineering said, we're going to get engineering to look at that. And then the vendor goes, okay, they looked at it and found this. And the head of legal goes, well, we need to contact these people. And they go, okay, you did that. But there was never a lot of connection between the executives. There was never a lot of, why does legal need to do this? Why does engineering do this? Everything was siloed. And so it worked well. It does what it needs to. It checks the box. There's a lot of reasons people do tabletops. It's not usually because executives have too much time on their hands. So, NIST, COSO, our ISMs, our ISOs, customer requests, all of these are reasons why companies will do these tabletops. And each of them will have different requirements that need to be met. If you're going for FedRAMP, you need to make sure you have A, B, and C. If you're doing ISO, I love ISO. You just need to say, yeah, you're going to do A, B, and C. Yeah. But when it came time for me to step up and offer my experience to my company to run tabletop, it was kind of dropped on me. One of my management team had expected to run, and they had developed a fishing tabletop. About a week before, they're like, oh, I've got a vacation scheduled. Derek, can you pick this up? And I'm like, yeah. So I'd been already prepping for a role-playing game convention called SAINTCON, running a tabletop exercise using a system called Dungeons and Data. And I'm like, I've got this. I'm going to use this Dungeons and Data system, and I'm going to make this work. So I started with a plan, and I love my acronyms. So acronyms help me remember things. All people seem to need sausage pizza, those kind of things. And the first is proportionate. If you go to your executive team and you say, hey, I know we do 8-hour tabletops. I want to run an 8-hour tabletop using Dungeons and Data, or Noes, the response is not going to be very good because you're not being realistic on what they are looking for. My pitch was, I'm going to get you the same level of review, same level of coverage that we're going to get in a 6-hour or a 4-hour tabletop in 2 hours. That's going to reduce the cost to the company because our executives are actually doing work instead of sitting here completing compliance. We're going to offer the same level of after-action reports that our vendors do. And this is what gets them. This is what I love. You're going to be able to take the experience you gained from running this 2-hour, and then in 6 months when we do it again, or 4 months when we do it again, you're going to be able to leverage that for your new character. And if you have anybody that's not been a D&D player or has not played video games, that last sentence kind of triggers them a little bit, and they wonder what you're talking about. That's where leverage comes in. You leverage in your experience, your skills. And the skills don't have to be cybersecurity. They can be, I tell stories. They can be, I can manage plans really well. Let me do this. Worst case scenario, you are out an hour of your time as executives because you've canceled the event halfway through it, and we're still paying our vendor. Make it actionable, though, because we saw in the last talk, everything begins with a question or an idea, but moving it to action rarely happens. Build that plan. So in preparation for my first tabletop, I went out and I developed a scenario. I developed characters. And through this, I was able to show my leadership team that this wasn't just some pipe dream, that there was an actual plan in place. The best part of it, though, is the end. And this is what gets most of the executive teams nowadays, because they're no longer made up of people my generation and older, we'll call it. A lot of these executives, especially in startups and things, are younger generations. They want something different than what everyone is offering. They want something novel. And, sorry, they told me to get water, and it's right. Start with something novel, something new. And by offering them something that's familiar, whether it's, we're going to give you a scenario similar to what you would see on Critical Role or on Penny Arcade's games. This spikes a lot of their interest because they want to see something new. And right-clicking does not work. Oh, went too far. I'm going to go back. So, the first thing I always recommend is bringing RPG elements into your incident response tabletop. And that includes things like randomness. One of my favorite things in one of the best games out there for this kind of idea generation is Backdoors and Breaches. It's a card game, but you can inject different changes to the scenario. You don't get that out of a standard tabletop exercise. Your vendor has programmed their scenario, and they're not going to deviate from it. Earlier this year, when I was running a scenario, the fishing scenario, one of our members of our incident response team was actually out sick. And the VP that I'm working with, he goes, oh, well, he would do this. So we're going to have him do this. And I'm like, no. You message him on Slack, he doesn't respond. And they're like, well, what do you mean he doesn't respond? This is our plan. Our plan says message the head of IT and he does this. You institute that randomness. You bring in imagination because now the plan is out the window and they're having to figure out how to answer and how to use the plan that they've practiced and drilled and read to apply it, just like a real scenario. But it takes imagination on your part too, to make sure that you can answer the challenges and changes. Part of that is being familiar with your company. I'm really lucky. I do a lot of our audits, so I know a lot about the stuff. I have great coworkers who I'll run a scenario by them. I'm like, is this even possible in our system? And they're like, no, don't do that. Do this instead. And then the one that I'm already running behind on is time tracking. So how many of you here, just raise your hands, have ever been in an incident response tabletop? Awesome. So many of you have probably seen the answer of, we're going to go look at the logs. And they go, okay, here's what you find. And then you've got your legal people over here that are trying to do a PR campaign to mitigate the release of information. But they're still trying to figure out what font they want. And now we've got our engineers that are 2 days ahead of them in timelines. A system or method of tracking time, of identifying, okay, you want to look at the logs. We've got, what systems are you going to use to access the logs? We're using CloudTrail or CloudWatch. Perfect. Do you want to have any problems with that one? No. My favorite was, great. What resources are you going to use? Are you going to bring a senior SRE team in on this? Or are you just going to put it out to the project managers to have them assign it out as interrupt work? Oh, like interrupt work. Great. That means it's lower, even though you've prioritized it, you're not going to get that same response as if you'd went to someone directly. But you go to someone directly, you're going to type those resources so someone else can't use them. That's the randomness. Then you get your magic. Magic, we all think of like fireball, magic missile. Nah, this is where the secret sauce comes in. This is the facilitator magic. So this is where, as the facilitator, you go and you begin to do math. I know, people recommend. Everything's great. D&D 5th edition, if you've never read it, it's all based on a D20 with scales of 5. 10 is normal. On a scale of 1 to 20, 10's in the middle. Add 5 if it's more difficult, minus 5 if it's less difficult, add 10 if it's really difficult, add minus 10 if it's, I'm turning on a computer. The novel section are these last two. Character sheets and skill and spell selection lists. I introduced these at our tabletop experience at a conference, at the SAINTCON conference, where we had 2 staff SREs, actually from my own company, playing this game at my table, and a Java developer along other people. And they thought it was interesting. One of them stepped up into the role of a CEO. Well, what does a CEO do? Well, the CEO knows that incident response plan, but in this case, they had a Rolodex. It's like, well, what do I use the Rolodex for? That's your contacts as a CEO that you can use, that no one else can. But in the heat of the moment, are you going to remember you have that resource? And that's where skill and spell lists come in handy. Generating real lists of things and resources that these executives or these people on your response team have access to is an easy way to remind them of actions they can take in real life scenarios that will improve their responses. 2 of the systems that I recommend. The first one is called Noes by Expel. Now, I'm always one to shy away traditionally from anything that requires you to put your business email address, how many people you have in your company, before you get the cool little thing. Noes is worth it. Expel was a great one. They reached out to me. I'm like, I am just using this for personal enrichment right now. We're not looking to have your company come and do anything. This just looks cool. And they're like, great, have a great day. I never heard from them again. The best thing ever. So what does it do well, though? It does that character creation. They had the ability to like, here are modifiers to make your character. Here is the tracking sheets. And that's one thing I really liked about Noes, is they had fully fleshed out incident master, so game master guidelines. Here are things you need to know when you're running a tabletop scenario. So they didn't think that you came in from knowing and running multiple scenarios or having read cyber.uk's Blue Box or CIS's tabletop examples. They're like, this is fine. And then they give a great tracking sheet. Okay, tracking sheets are just, something that you could whip up in Excel or Google Sheets, but it works really well in that it gives you a default list. Engineering projects, non-technical projects, and you can begin to track them. And so when your engineering team is going, okay, we're going to do A, B, C, and D, because they know what to do in an incident. But your legal team or your HR team are lagging behind, you can be fine. You can be successful and manage both of them. And then let your engineering team know your answer will come when legal team catches up to your day. And that keeps everything on track. And that's the last thing that they do well is the ongoing adventure continuity. They have things like experience points, ways to level up your character. But like I said, it requires that email, and it really is a great system for those who don't have a lot of role-playing or game master or storytelling experience, which is not me. So I put that as my not so well, because it is rather structured. And it doesn't do well if you want to go a little off rails and start to select your own customizations, things like non-traditional systems or teams or individuals that bridge technical and non-technical. All right. The last one. This one was actually, this was at the RSA conference in 2018 by Josh Bressers of Open Source Security. He actually did an entire presentation where everybody got a character sheet. And they played a version of Dungeons and Data with the audience. And it gives that framework that is very much, here is your classes. Here are some ideas for rounds. Here are some ideas for magic, for spell lists. And then it says, go and do it yourself. But it gives also tables of random events that can happen. But as I say there, it's not a show ready. As an individual, you need to do more work to get it to be presentable to your leadership team or your IR team. So I was going to give you a walkthrough of this Dungeons and Data that I did, but this is an example of what Alex Johnson, CEO's character sheet looked like. All these character sheets, they had backgrounds, they had contact lists, but then they also had abilities. Adding those abilities in, things like CEO had one that was pull in the resources. Now, our CEOs have extreme power. They can call down unlimited overtime with no questions asked. They can call in, keep that engineer 37 hours straight. And they're the ones that they're accountable to for it. And so these characters had this information. And you're thinking, why would I want my CEO knows what to do? Why would he want this? And this is where the IR tabletop using Noes, using Dungeons and Data comes in successfully. Your engineering lead doesn't have to be, or your VP of engineering doesn't have to play the VP of engineering, because they need to know the incident response plan. They don't need to know only what engineering does, how to respond to an incident. And this is where imagination comes in. With proper buy-in, you begin to swap roles. Now, that doesn't mean that your general counsel will become engineering and know everything engineering does. However, you're all in the same room, you're all on the same tabletop. You should be working collaboratively together to resolve the issue. But everybody should know what the incident response plan is and how it works beyond their team. This allows additional scope to improve. This also allows things like experience points, character creation to continue on after a single tabletop, because they can continue to grow and flesh out their character and gain more information as they learn about how their own company responds to the risks. So, when I gave this one, when I've talked before on this, people have asked, they're like, this is great. How do I get the buy-in? How do we make this happen? And we've got my acronym plan. And that's all on you as the incident master or the incident management team lead. Gathering your resources. Make sure that you know what compliance requirements you have for these tabletops, what you need to fulfill. That means engaging with your security applications team. That means engaging with your people operations team and really understanding the needs they have and the fears they have. And you don't need to go to the VPs. You don't need to go to the ELG, the executive level. Go to the directors. Go to the team leads and ask them, what keeps you up at night? And you'll hear things like shadow software. Well, we have a shared password for an item, but no one knows which email address is used to reset it. And so we've just never reset it, and we hope we never lose it. Visibility like that is invaluable, but gets so easily lost. Then present it and pivot away. So give a timeline where you will move away from your traditional tabletop to what you have now. And so in end, I will leave you with the Matt Mercer line that he coined in Critical Role. How do you want to do this? You have a monster. You've been given the tools to make it no longer as tedious and as horrible as it could be. But it'll be up to you on how you want to do this. Thank you.